Today's lesson is going to basically go over some just beginner compositing and post techniques using Photoshop and Maya together. We're going to take a look at bringing some alpha channeled Tiff files or Tiff or EXR files from Maya into Photoshop. And then we're going to use the image plane to help kind of align our 3D objects with whatever background image we are going to try to composite into. We're going to look at some layering techniques in Photoshop. We're going to talk about mocking up a human silhouette using some vector shapes from Illustrator. And then we're also going to look at sort of an exploded diagram style in Illustrator. So you'll get 3 or 4 different techniques for compositing both live in the 3D environment and then bringing that out and compositing inside of Photoshop and in Illustrator. And just some ways we can take 3D design and combine it with 2D and do some interesting mock-ups. Alright, so let's start off here. You're looking right now at just a simple little, you could think of this as like a futuristic little sculpture I'm going to try to embed into a landscape. So I've created this simple object out of a primitive a sphere and a cylinder. I gave it a light, gave it an Arnold texture. If we pull it up right now, it's pretty basic, very nice. I think it's the plastic preset inside of Arnold that we used on that one. So I'm going to close that. And first thing we're going to talk about is image planes. So any camera view can bring an image plane in. Most of the time when we're working with image planes, we might be bringing it into, say, a front view. And this would be for like a character sheet. If we had some sketches or designs of the character in kind of a T-pose, a front view and a side view, we would bring the front view into the front view and side view into the side view. And you can do that by going to View and coming down to Image Plane and Import Image. And so on my computer right now, on my desktop, I've got, let's see here, there we go, Compositing Basics. I've got this basic meadow image. And I can bring this in, and this is actually an object. You'll notice that I have in my outliner there, image plane, and if I go and view it, you'll see this image plane, at least in my perspective view, is right there in the center at the X and Y axis. And I can scale that object up, I can make it bigger, and as you can see, it becomes sort of the background for that front view. All the other views, you're not really seeing it in the top view or the side view because it's just a 2D plane. You do see in the perspective view as I start to move it around, move my camera around, and kind of get the position that I want, right? So this is one way to do it, and by bringing it into the side view, or the front view, side view, or top view, any of the orthographic views, you can manipulate it. Kind of a strange thing, but for some reason when you bring it into the perspective view, it kind of ties it to the camera. So you can still do it. It can actually be a nice way to manipulate it as well, but you just need to know. So if I bring it into my perspective view and do the same thing, so if I go here and there we go. I get the same thing, but it just sort of it's frozen back there, right? Now if I can zoom in and out, obviously my object, but it's kind of a fixed view, and it doesn't really show up in your outliner unless you go to display and you turn off this toggle that says DAG objects only. Then you get all this other stuff that's normally hidden in case you don't know what you're doing. But if I go to the default layer view or the default layer group there, you'll see there's the image plane. And so I can still, I can still get it. I just have to go to display and turn off that DAG objects only and know that it's bringing in a whole bunch of other stuff for me to view that might not want to mess around with right now. But that allows me to manipulate it as well. I could hide it or bring it back. I could scale it down if I want to. Well, actually, it does lock it. It's interesting. In some ways, yeah, it's not as manipulatable as it is if you put it into the orthographic views. But if you want it to be locked to the camera, so if I go to single view here, that's just always going to be moved no matter where I move my camera around. It's sort of just locked in the background of that perspective camera, kind of off in the distance, right? And I can pretty much zoom this way in and out, and it's always going to be there in the background. So this is one way I can begin to think about okay, where does my object get placed in respect to that background image, because this is an image I'm going to eventually composite in Photoshop. So I want to have my 3D lined up with that image. So, I could sit here like this and try to get it so it's like laying in the middle of this kind of foreground grassy hill. If I wanted to, I could start to, move my object around and try to place it and get it where I want it. All that being said, it might be easier if you don't want to deal with all that and just be kind of in the default mode here to go ahead and bring it into that view here in my front view and go to image plane. And there we go again. Because now I can just more easily manipulate the object as well. I can scale it up. I can still have it in the background, but I can like play around with where it is in the depth of that background, all of that stuff, right? Now you do have to watch out. It can get some funky tilts going, and as you can see, because of my camera angle view, it's not locked back there anymore. So I have to kind of manipulate things a little bit differently. So for compositing's sake, this can work. I just need to try to keep it as straight on in my camera view as possible, knowing that I'm going to be compositing it back in Photoshop later. But this still works just fine. It's the nice thing about bringing up your gate mask, or I'm sorry, your resolution gate, is that you can kind of see where the frame of what I'm rendering is going to be. So I want to try to get it within that render at least. I'm going to bring that down a little bit within the borders and get it lined up nicely. Now I can continue to do the same thing, maybe not so much with my camera view, but I could manipulate my object and move it around and try to place it on the hill there. Looks like this guy needs to go a little bit further back. So it's a few more variables to play with if you bring it into the front view into one of the orthographic views, but you can still get the same effect. Basically, we're just trying to place this guy, and then we're going to hide that image plane, and then we're going to render it, and then we're going to bring it all back together again in Photoshop later. But we want to get the general angle right. So I think that could work. Yeah, I think that's close enough to look like it's actually in the scene. I bring up my preview here. Yeah, that's about a good placement for it there. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and hide the image plane and bring up my render view. And let's go ahead and render this out. Now, one thing by default, before you render out, you really should check your render settings. I didn't do it there, so I still had it on EXR, which is fine because I have all the EXR plugins. And I had it set up with an alpha channel, but if you don't have an EXR plugin for Photoshop, you might want to switch that over to a Tiff file instead. And that's going to give you a high-res image, no compression, but also still keep that alpha channel. But the EXR will work since I have a plugin, so I'm going to go ahead and hide Maya. And my renders are just on my desktop here. So there we go, Compositing Basics. You can see it's got a nice alpha channel there. And I'm going to go ahead and grab my mountain meadow and bring that down into Photoshop. Alright, cool. And now I can go ahead and bring that EXR file in. And there we go. And the nice thing about aligning that up ahead of time in the 3D is it actually is placed pretty well inside of Photoshop now. It actually looks like it belongs there on the mountainside. And you can see it's on its own layer there. That EXR came in on its own, so I could still move it around and place it wherever I want, right? And if I want to, I could do something like add a little edge drop shadow. This is sort of like midday sun, so there's not like really long shadows in this scene. But if I wanted to, I could still add a little, let's give it a drop shadow and get the angle that's kind of coming forward a little bit. Not too much, just a little bit coming off of it. And I'll play with the opacity, I'll bring that up a little bit. And maybe just tighten that up a little bit. There we go. Just to soften its edges a little bit. And I could do any compositing I want at this point. I could change its hue and saturation and shift its colors around. I could do lots of things to it however I like. But very easily you're starting to create a composited scene with your 3D object and the environment. Now lighting is going to be key here. Does this lighting look like it actually matches the environment or not? Maybe I would like to use more of a sun kind of distant light, more of an ambient light on this instead of this sort of like spotlight feature that I had from the area light. You can spend a lot of time. That's the real key in compositing, is trying to match the light in your scenes. But for something rough and ready, I think it works out pretty well, and I can go ahead and bring that in there. Now another thing I might want to do is bring in, I'm going to go ahead and just save this real quick as a Mountain Meadow PSD. There we go. I'll go ahead and hide Photoshop. I also have, sometimes I like to bring in a human silhouette just to give scale. So I have a silhouette EPS file here. I downloaded for free off the web. You could go ahead and create your own just by using the pen tool in Illustrator and outlining a photograph of some sort. But one of the things I end up doing a lot, especially in like architectural renderings, is I will go ahead and bring in a human silhouette and kind of do a cardboard cutout version of it and kind of position it in the scene, and then go ahead and bring that into my composite as well. So let's see, let's go with I think this guy will be fine, just kind of standing there. I'm just going to go ahead and copy. That was Command C, or go up to Edit and copy. And I'm going to use Maya's built-in here under probably the SVG mode. And what's great about clicking on this SVG item here up under the Poly Modeling tab is then I can hit the paste button, and he's automatically given kind of a depth. He's already extruded into an object and not just brought in as a curve. You can also save it as a curve. You can save it as an Illustrator 8 file and import it, and then put it into an extrude NURB, or whatever you want to do with it. But I think that's the easiest way to bring it into a scene, right? I'm going to bring that image plane back, and I'm going to go ahead and give this guy just a new material real quick and make it black. Just so it has that full silhouette vibe to it. And actually I want to play around with that thickness a little bit on him. He's a little bit too thick. I'm going to just kind of, if I really want the cardboard cut out, I don't really want to see the edges. Alright, let's come back here. And he's really big right now, although maybe the sculpture is not that tall, but he just feels a little big for this particular composite. So I'm going to bring him down a little bit. Maybe make him like a little bit taller than it. It's funny though, the default position he came in is pretty good. Bring him forward just a little bit in the scene. Maybe just a little bit down the hill. Okay. Yeah, so I could continue to do a lot. I could rotate him a little bit. I could just try to get him to kind of be placed in the scene a little bit more. This is particularly helpful with like architectural items, like I said, to just kind of give some scale and context, but this will also give the scale of like how big this sculpture is. It's not some monumental 20-foot high thing. It's maybe 5 or 6 feet high, or a little bit even shorter, like 4 to 5 feet high. I can bring him down just a little bit more. Alright, cool. And now, if I give this the Arnold preview, you're probably not going to see him because he's all black. Yeah, he's not going to see him right there. That's okay. So I'm going to hide my image plane again, and actually I'm going to hide this object just so I can bring it in as a separate render. And I'm going to go ahead and just so I don't overwrite my old render, I'll give this guy Compositing Basics. I'll give it a different name. There we go. Alright, let's go ahead and render this out. Let's see if that rendered. That was a little bit odd. Yep, he rendered. Cool. Now, I didn't have to bring that into 3D, but it just helped me kind of place it and see it all together. I could have just done all this compositing inside of Photoshop, but sometimes you want to get a specific kind of like camera forced perspective view, and sometimes it's easier to do it in 3D, but you could also do it in Photoshop. We'll take a look at both. So there he is. I can move him around wherever I want at this point, and kind of place him into the scene. I could put him right in front of it or right next to it, anything like that. Now same thing, I didn't have to do that, but sometimes, especially if I was going to animate this, maybe do like a pan past him, it's easier to just have it into 3D. In this particular case, since I'm doing it all in 2D, I could have easily just copied and pasted it from Illustrator as well as a smart object, and then brought that down into the scene and scaled it in however I want. And there he is. Actually a little bit crisper that way. So it really just depends on what you're doing. If I bring him in with it, you can see there's not a lot of difference, other than I'd have the ability to move the camera and pivot around and get different kind of 3D views on it. So whichever way works best for you and whichever scenario you're working in. Alright, last thing I'm going to do is we're going to take this same design. I'm going to go ahead and hide the Photoshop now. And I'm going to create, I'm going back to Illustrator. I'm going to do a new document here. And let's just go 1920 by 1080. Alright, let's go grab that original sculpture. So now I'm going to do sort of the exploded diagram. Oh, I forgot, sorry. That is still an EXR format, so this will be a lot easier to get from the Photoshop document. So let's grab it there instead. Hide a few of these menus to make it easier to see. So let's go ahead and grab, yeah, there he is. I don't know if I can still drag and drop from Photoshop. Let's see if that'll work. No. Let's see if I can copy and paste it. There we go. That'll work. So I just copied and pasted that in from Photoshop. And so, one of the classic things I end up doing with 3D a lot, particularly if I'm making mock-ups and or a proposal and I made something in 3D and I want to kind of explain what it is I'll do sort of an exploded diagram design. And a lot of times, I'll put a little bit of text info up here. This is a new modern sculpture. I might have a logo up there. Let's give it a nice bold Helvetica here. Bring that up. V1. Maybe I throw the date in. And I might throw a website down at the bottom. And I'll often have more than one view. I'll do like a front view like this. I'll do a orthographic a little perspective view, maybe a top view. And then I'll use these lovely line tools to kind of, point out different features. And let's give this stroke a color, and 1 point is fine. I like to use dash lines on some of these. Let's do like a 3-point dash. Let's see how that's looking. It's a little light. I'm going to go with a slightly darker color. Let's go with something like that. Cool. And then bring in some text and say aerodynamic fins, sure. And maybe I give that same dark color. And you can even put some lovely arrows on these if you want to. Kind of point to what you're doing. And then I'll just kind of duplicate the whole thing. I'm doing an option drag on that. Option or Alt if you're on a PC. Maybe from this side. If you hold down Command or Control, you can grab just the individual points. And I'll switch the sides on this. And I'll put in solid stone base. And onward and onward. And you can kind of do like a really nice setup this way. A nice proposal to kind of like show off what your object is. And again, just a really easy way. In this particular case, I didn't have to have a TIFF or an EXR. I could have saved this out as a JPEG and brought it into Illustrator, but I like having alpha channels because if I wanted to throw this over a background or if I wanted to change the color in the background, I totally could. So, I could bring in a background shape and give it a different tone. Whoops, didn't mean to do that, but let's bring that in. And change that to, say, bright orange. Take object and send it to back. And the alpha channel gives me that ability to float it on top of whatever I want. So whether it's an image, a solid color, a gradient, there's a lot of different ways that we could work around and have some fun with it. So just a brief overview of some of the different things you can do with compositing, whether you're going to bring it into Illustrator for a vector layout like this, whether you're going to bring it into Photoshop and try to composite it in with a photograph or a nice illustrated 2D design of some sort. There's so many possibilities. Obviously, big ones when you get into animation is working with like After Effects or Nuke and all of these different ways that you can start to composite things together. But learning post and manipulating these color, saturation, brightness, contrast, all of this stuff in Photoshop that you can do under your adjustments, your adjustment layers, all of that. There's just so much you can do. So have some fun, get to know these relationships back and forth between Photoshop, Illustrator, and Maya, and you'll be on your way. All right, thanks for tuning in.